We are back here for another beautiful day and, of course, a beautiful episode of League Unlocked. My name's Eric. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for stopping by the studio today. With Europe done, the regular season, it's behind us. It's over with. The playoffs are set. We have a week until those playoff series get underway. We've got some time to kill. So what better way to do that than to shout out some of the best players from the split that was. We're taking a look at the all-pro squads, or at least who we think should be represented on this year's all-pro honors. We got first team, second team, and third team, and there were a lot of standout performances. It's very difficult to narrow down really only 3 from every position, and some of these guys who are sitting in that 4 to 5 spot really had fantastic splits, and it's a shame that they can't be honored here as well. But there's a limited amount of spots, so we've got to do the hard work and tough decisions to narrow it down. We got to start with that first team All-Pro, the best of the best from their positions, and throughout the split, man, this has shifted so very much. I mean, the first 5 weeks, you'd probably put 4, maybe even all 5 G2 members. But the last 4 weeks, really, obviously, there was a significant dip in performance across the board for those guys. But still, starting at that very top spot, you got to go with Wonder. And I know it was very tough between him and Cabochard. They both had incredible splits for G2 and Vitality, respectively. But even in, you saw, I think that performance against Fnatic really just clinched Wonder as that first team all-pro top laner. And really throughout 2018, he was still the best top laner in at least Europe, and I think that's been the same here in the spring split. He has just put on some incredible carry performances. He dominates that laning phase. Whether or not Jankos is throwing attention his way, he can just get up these leads himself as long as he has. Sometimes he doesn't even need to have a favorable matchup, but you saw he was at first in the CSD at 15 throughout the entirety of the split. He was just racking up huge leads in the laning phase, and when you're playing some disgusting carry champions like a Ryze or a Camille, well, you can completely take over some of these games, and I think he was one of the biggest win conditions alongside Caps with this G2 roster that we saw throughout all of 2019. So Wonder, maybe you could make arguments, but I think he's still a slight step ahead of Cabochard, and really Vitality fell off a little bit at the end as well, and G2 did still finish in first place. So finishing with 13 wins, you got to have Wonder as the best top laner in the LEC for 2019. When it comes to the jungle, it was one of the more difficult roles to siphon through who the best performers have been, and Selfmade, they made playoffs, SK Gaming, which is an overperformance for sure, what we were expecting with this squad. And he was the main win condition, at times even the sole win condition and the sole reason for them picking up wins in, I swear, at least 7 to 8 of the games that they won. They only won 10 games, by the way, so he was the clear MVP for this team. It didn't matter if he was playing heavy engaged junglers, carry junglers. He had some of the highest damage percentage numbers. You remember he had that Xin Zhao game, I believe it was against Splice, that they lost, and he did 29% of his team's damage on the jungler that isn't Karthus, which is absolutely insane. His pathing and just constant catching out of the opposing team's junglers was something incredible throughout the entirety of the split. We saw so many different champions that he could excel on, even in that last week when they needed to go at least 2-0 to clinch a playoff spot. He started bringing out the Skarner, which was just recently buffed. And I mean, he didn't excel as well on that pick as some of his more comfort ones, even the Lee Sin or the Xin Zhao that we saw early on, but he adapted to the new picks in the meta so quickly with that Skarner and the Rek'Sai. He was immediately popping off on something that you can build a lot of damage on, and what a debut split for him. The clear front runner for Rookie of the Split, and probably even going to be getting some MVP nods, so incredible from him. Mid lane, it's got to be Caps. I know we talked about the downfall of G2 or the, slight downfall of how well they were performing, but the first 5 weeks, Caps was completely destroying everyone in the LEC. He still had the most solo kills, and we know the damage numbers for G2 members are a bit skewed because their motto is fight, 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 no matter how much gold we are down. So Caps did have some questionable games to close out the split, but he just had too many carry performances for G2 that you couldn't put him in as that first team all-pro mid laner, and that's back-to-back splits for him. Again, a guy you could be talking about for MVP, but the MVP race in general is as much up in the air as I think we've probably ever seen it in the history of the LEC or the LCS. There's a lot of guys' names that you could throw in the hat, but for the all-pro mid laner, the one guy you're pretty certain is going to be there is Caps. And just because you know the potential this guy has, you know he, at any time, even unless he's against the Zed as Cassiopeia, he can take over a game at any given moment on pretty much any champion. So he comes in right there, and then AD carry and support. Who would have thunk after 3 to 4 weeks that we'd be talking about Reckless and Hylissang, but they are two of the biggest reasons why Fnatic had that incredible turnaround. And we talked about the dip in play that we saw from G2 the last few weeks of the regular season. The Fnatic was the complete opposite, and you don't forgive, but you definitely, it makes it easier to forget the struggles that they had in the first half. We were questioning, how are Reckless and Hylissang losing lane to all these new bottom lanes in Europe? They have a full year together that they've played. Well, the last 5 weeks basically are much more what we expected from this squad, and it was so many different games that we saw the advantages coming from that bottom lane. Broxa obviously was giving them a whole lot of attention, but that's because they were getting these advantages by themselves in a 2v2, and Broxa able to just capitalize and really snowball that lead even more. A lot of these wins, this one against G2, which obviously had the best ending we've seen in years, but it was a clean early game from Fnatic because of that advantage that the bottom lane was getting. And anytime Broxa's come in, this is what we saw at Worlds, these level 2 ganks from Broxa, setting up the bottom lane, setting up Reckless to carry and take over these games. It's incredible because the first 3 weeks or so, you could basically put Hiku and Reckless's numbers side by side and you wouldn't know whose is who. They were almost the exact same. So the fact that he's bounced back, gotten his KDA north of 5, and just put up the numbers we're more accustomed to seeing from him is absolutely incredible, the turnaround these guys had. And again, they're one of the main reasons why Fnatic completely turned around their season, as well as some other guys stepping up who we will get to a little bit later. But the bot lane for Fnatic comes in as that all-pro squad in the bottom lane, and that was another very contested position that we saw here throughout the entirety of 2019. But have no fear, because coming up after the break, we take a look at the second and third team squads and who is left off the list in the 2019 spring split. Hello friends, and welcome back to League Unlock as we continue looking at what the all-pro squads will be like in EU after the LEC regular season's behind us. The debut season of the LEC, we already went through the first team, which means it's time to go on to that second team all-pro, where you've got some guys that you might have expected maybe to fight for that first team, starting in that top lane. Of course, we already talked about Wunder and Cabochard. Clearly, and I mean clearly, the best two top laners in the entire split in the LEC, but Cabo comes in on that second team All-Pro. He was the MVP of Vitality. Even in a lot of the games that they were losing, he was the sole lane that was performing well. He was getting a lot of attention from Mowgli because, as you know, as a jungler, a lot of the times it doesn't help the gank losing lanes. You're just going to get counter-ganked and get destroyed. So he got more attention from Mowgli because in a lot of these games, he was the only lane doing well for Vitality. And I mean, when Urgot was meta, he was completely styling on people with that. He's the guy who really, when you see Vitality lock in, Jarvan, more often than not, you're going to be seeing Cabochard playing it over Mowgli because he just loves dunking people in that top lane, and he's was definitely the best performing top lane Jarvan in the spring split. Bwipo right there behind him, but definitely Cabochard putting some work in on that pick. And if you remember when this new Vitality roster came, he was the only member returning from that 2017 squad, and he definitely showed up in a huge way for them this split, and definitely deserving of, at the very least, a second team All-Pro nod. When it comes to jungle, we talked about Reckless and Hylissang, while the other big name turnaround for Fnatic was, of course, Broxah. This is the guy who we're accustomed to seeing have double-digit KDA numbers throughout the entirety of a split. He didn't quite get there because of the, again, horrendous start that Fnatic had this split, but he definitely turned things around, and it was all about the early game and continued to be all about the early game during this win streak for Fnatic, and Broxah was a key member. Why? Look at that kill percentage for a jungler. That is pretty insane. He definitely, Karthus, Rek'Sai, whatever you need from him. He played whatever champion, and his early game is back on point. Nukeduck is in on the mid lane as our first member of Origin to make this list, and this guy has played 14 champions in 18 games. 14 different champions. His champion ocean is almost a meme at this point, but it's absolutely disgusting how many different champions he can play. So I mean, he's got to be here. He's been one of the most consistent mid laners throughout the entirety of the split, and Origin locked up that second seed, so I think there might be a few more of his teammates on this list going forward. Kobbe, a kind of surprise second team All-Pro nod. I mean, the first 5 weeks you were definitely talking all about Upset and Perks being on this spot, but Kobbe, the last few weeks for Splyce, was just an absolute beast in these late game fights, and basically every team fight, every draft was built around this guy, and Splyce became quite good at playing around him, and he was dominating on a lot of these carries. Vayne, not a champion we're necessarily accustomed to seeing from him, but he performed super well on it. Obviously, he had that performance against G2 where he completely took the game over and basically won the game for them and really outshined Perks in a lot of these team fights. You could definitely see the experience of these late game team fights, which is something when it's your first split playing AD carry, you know, you usually don't get to this point in scrims. It's got to be these on-stage games where you have that experience, which is definitely something Kobbe shined through with there, and he had a fantastic split for Splyce. It all started back in 2018 when he was the main guy who stayed on this roster through all the changes. They've clearly been trying to play through him. And then support, you saw Mickey on there. He has been the guy guiding Perks and helping him with his first time at ADC. And without him in the lineup, I think Perks performs at a much lower level. Then we got the third team All-Pro squad, where there's a lot of Origin members hanging out here, and deservedly so. I mean, they finished 6 wins in a row to close things out. It was an easier schedule, but they locked up that second seed, as I just said. So Alfari is your third team All-Pro top laner. He's one of the kind of like Soaz. This entire Origin roster reminds me so much of 2015 Origin. You've got a guy who doesn't demand many resources, just a rock in the top lane, and he did that perfectly well for them. He had some great Kennen games to close out the split, so he comes in as the third team. And Jankos is your third team All-Pro jungler, which, again, after week 5, maybe, you were talking this guy's the clear front runner for MVP, obviously the best jungler in the LEC, but he had a serious dip towards the end, probably the biggest dip of any of the members on G2, and I mean, we have some Lee Sin plays here where he looked great, but overall, that champion, he seemed a little bit underwhelming on, and when the Karthus pick isn't working out, man, it can look very bad for him, but he obviously, his early game and first blood percentage is still among some of the very best, but I just feel like Broxah and Selfmade did more for their team in the weeks that mattered most, which was the entire second half of the split, and you've got to grade the last 4 to 5 weeks a little bit higher than the first 4 to 5. And quick shout outs to Xerxes and Cold. They didn't make the top 3, but they are right there. They had fantastic splits. I wish we could hand out more All-Pro squads, but then you're just basically doing 10 All-Pro teams. But Cold and Xerxes were so close to making that top 3. They both had terrific splits for their squads. In that mid lane, it's another Fnatic member, Nemesis, and some of his numbers were a little bit skewed. He still managed to get the best KDA. This guy just doesn't die. He does play very passive, and that was one of the main criticisms of him early on in the split, but I think he definitely turned it on more towards the second half. And that first blood percentage, he works super well with Broxa. I think the main change as to why he started performing better is he got more ganks. Remember how often Broxa was setting up a tent for Caps in the mid lane? Well, he's doing a little bit more of that and allowing Nemesis to really flourish, and that's why he's coming in as a third team. Another quick shout out, Humanoid. Again, very close, and you could argue between Nemesis and him. Both rookies had incredible splits. For the bottom lane, it's the OG boys, Patrick and Mithy, and you could really argue the AD carry spot was a tough decision. Patrick, you could really argue him being higher up because some of his numbers, basically all his numbers, are among the very best in the LEC. He's played a bunch of different champions. It doesn't matter if he's playing on the carry champions like Draven, where you want to get them ahead, or the Vayne, or he can play these more supportive ADCs in Sivir. We saw Ashe, so he's very well-rounded, and him and Mithy as a whole were fantastic this split. I know Mithy was playing kind of more so a lot of Tahm Kench and Braum, but those are the busted champions right now. Mithy is definitely back to his EU form, and he's just guiding another rookie AD carry. And I want to say one more time, this Origin roster, comparing it to 2015, you got a young AD carry that the team is not afraid to play against, that resourceless top laner when it comes to SOAS, and Cold, you could compare to Amazing for sure. Expeke and Nukeduck, they can play pretty much any champion in the game. You should be excited for Origin in playoffs. That's all the time today for League Unlocked. My name's Eric. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next time.